We still think of Queen Victoria as the monarch who was not amused. In fact, she was full of surprises.
Somebody turned up with this and said, I only have a small request to ask Her Majesty to say something into this machine.
Victoria was the first British monarch to record her voice, and I'm told this is it.
Well, it's not the Christmas broadcast, is it, today? But it's a first of its kind.
Not only did Queen Victoria embrace new technology, she was a modernizer who transformed the monarchy.
And the key to understanding that transformation lies in one building, Buckingham Palace. We're going to delve into the spaces the public doesn't get to see and reveal the story of Victoria at the palace and how she, with her beloved consort Albert, made a home for the modern monarchy.
A balcony there. It's a brilliant idea.
We use the latest 3D images to bring Victoria's palace back to life. And we reveal how her innovations influenced the crown right up to today.
We uncover unique insights into her life.
Queen Victoria danced all night.
From extravagant upstairs dining...
Victoria was notorious for being able to put away a 9-course meal in half an hour.
...to rooting out household fraud.
What was entrenched was corruption.
And throwing open the doors to the public.
We discover a different Victoria from the one we think we know.
I wasn't expecting to find it so moving.
200 years after the birth of Queen Victoria, we'll be exploring how the young monarch turned Buckingham Palace from an unloved irrelevance into the home of monarchy. Buckingham Palace is known around the world as the heart of the monarchy. It's the first place that comes to mind when you think of the royal family. For many, it's the building that symbolizes Britain. And it's all thanks to Queen Victoria. Today, Julie and I are heading to the palace, but this time, we're going beyond the gates.
We've worked outside this palace in our day jobs.
And it's always different standing outside, looking at this magnificent edifice, and then actually going inside.
We're going behind the famous facade to find out how it was transformed by a very different Queen Victoria than the one we grew up with.
I've just got that very, I suppose, traditional understanding of Queen Victoria, the elderly monarch in her widow's weeds.
A bit dowdy.
Generally displeased. And I think...
Generally not amused.
Generally not amused.
When our present Queen moved into Buckingham Palace in 1953, she did so with a husband and 2 children in tow. But when her great-great-grandmother Victoria took up residence in the palace in 1837, she was an unmarried teenager with a dog called Dash.
It is my sad duty to inform you that the King breathed his last at 12 minutes past 2.
My poor dear uncle.
I'm meeting historian Dr. Amanda Foreman to find out more.
Amanda, what was Victoria's reaction to coming to Buckingham Palace?
In her diary, she writes, I was in ecstasy. And she just thought it was the most marvellous thing. Of course, what she didn't understand was actually it was half finished. She walked in, the workmen were still painting the walls. Buckingham Palace hadn't been lived in when she moved in, so it had all the defects of a house that had been unloved and uncared for. And the very first thing she did is that she had her mother put in the furthest possible apartments in this building.
Good day, Mama. I hope you'll find it comfortable here.
And then whenever her mother wanted to see Queen Victoria, she had to write a note saying, please may I come and say hello? And Queen Victoria would write back saying, busy. Within 48 hours she was having a piano concert, and that's what she wanted. She wanted music and laughter and games. There was quite a lot of drinking, and her mother did write her a note saying, "I'm rather shocked to have seen that you were a little tipsy last night," which Queen Victoria thought was rather funny.
But did she also enjoy being queen at that terribly tender age?
Yes, she almost worried that she might wake up one day and it had all been taken away from her. And then,
Really?
Yes, and then she went on to say, everyone says I'm a completely different person now. There was a moment when she got very angry and she said, they can't treat me like I'm a little girl any longer. I am the Queen of England.
The assertive young queen enjoyed the freedoms of the palace. Royal Collection Trust Senior Curator Caroline de Guito tells me about her love of entertaining.
This is a wonderful survival from the costume balls which Queen Victoria gave here at Buckingham Palace, funnily enough in this room.
For each ball, a particular era was chosen, and the costumes had to be historically accurate.
Everything about this dress is 17th century. This beautiful lace collar, the sleeves which finish just above the elbow, and this overskirt which reveals this incredibly elaborate Indian fabric.
This summer, the ball gown will be on display in an exhibition here about Queen Victoria's life at Buckingham Palace.
A dress like this speaks to an image of Victoria which is entirely different from the one that general perception talks about.
Absolutely. This dress encapsulates this idea of the Queen enjoying herself. Queen Victoria danced till 2 o'clock in the morning.
So how did she become a party-loving teenager?
To find out, I'm heading to Kensington Palace. Lately, this has been a happy home for young royals. But for Victoria, it was little more than a prison. It became her home on the death of her father when she was just 8 months old. Even though Kensington Palace is open to the public, we've got to be a bit quiet this morning because it's pretty early, and of course a young family lives here, the Cambridges, so we're just trying to keep the noise down a bit. Victoria was brought up here by her mother, the Duchess of Kent. I'm exploring how it had a profound influence on her with Amanda Foreman.
Kensington Palace was Queen Victoria's entire world until she became 18. Her only freedom was when she played in the garden. And then the public would press its noses up against the gates, and then she would wave, and they'd wave back.
A bit of a gilded cage.
Yes, it was. It made more so because her mother, the Duchess of Kent, really wanted to have total control over her and devised something called the Kensington system. They totally isolated her. No friends. She even slept in her mother's bedroom every night of her life until she became queen. Nowadays, we would call that brainwashing.
The isolation was designed to stop Victoria repeating the sins of her forefathers. Just like today, the press took any opportunity to poke fun at the royals, and they had plenty of material to work with. Victoria's predecessors had been portrayed as gout-ridden, debauched and mad. The hope was that Victoria wouldn't become such an easy target. In the room where she slept with her mother, Amanda is letting me see some potent clues to Victoria's strange, friendless childhood.
So what? Gosh, look at these tiny objects. Beautiful.
Yes, it's a doll that you could hold in your hand and have conversations with. This particular doll is known as Lady Newport. Victoria dressed this doll herself very lovingly, and she chose the fabrics. And these dolls were her touchstone between her inner fantasy life and then her real life.
So another from her doll collection. It's exquisite. The bodice on it.
From the age of 3, Victoria built up a collection of over 130 dolls.
And it was a way of having friends, which poor Victoria did not have in her real life.
And we're actually in the room that she shared with her mother. So it's entirely possible she would have played with these dolls on the floor of this room, or she could perhaps hear other children outside. Is sort of heartbreaking, really.
But the loneliness didn't destroy the young Victoria.
Now, what do you see in this sketch?
Good heavens. Determined sort of pursed lips.
It is. It's Victoria's self-portrait. And she sketched this the year that she turned 16, and she had become very ill with typhoid. And her mother decided they were going to force her to sign an agreement that her mother would become regent, and there was something within her that resisted.
So she held back. She just knew that was a line she couldn't cross.
Yes. It's almost tragic because it's a girl alone saying, I will resist.
I wasn't expecting to have such a strong sense of this young woman as she prepared to become queen. It's really been quite an extraordinary experience and quite affecting. I was really interested to see how Victoria escaped the gilded cage of Kensington Palace.
And then to come to this place, what an awful condition this place was in at that time.
With Victoria's arrival, Buckingham Palace had become a home at last. But the young Queen's plans for modernising this neglected building had only just begun.
Nice to have a nose around as well, isn't it?
It is rather.
Buckingham Palace is where the nation welcomes leaders from around the world. The highlight of these visits is often a dinner with Her Majesty. Queen Victoria began entertaining heads of state here, using her home to oil the wheels of diplomacy. In the immaculate kitchens, banquets for hundreds of guests are prepared. But when the young Queen Victoria entertained, it was best not to look too closely. As the Queen danced and partied upstairs, I'm keen to know what was going on below stairs in the long-neglected palace.
Dr. Gray, here we are.
I've been granted rare access to the kitchens in the company of food historian Dr. Annie Gray.
I've never seen these kitchens before, so it's quite exciting to be in them and see all these archways which would have held a fire or a hearth. This very low ceiling wouldn't have been here, it was double height.
Today's pristine space still holds clues to a very different life in the Victorian kitchens of the 1850s.
What were conditions like for people working in these kitchens?
One of the biggest problems were these chafing stoves, which were used for French-style sauces, so lots of sort of close work. And for that, chefs would use charcoal because it burnt with a smokeless flame.
Yes.
But it gave off carbon monoxide. These would have been filled with charcoal, so that's giving off a lot of fumes. I looked at a lot of death certificates for the chefs, and it was terrifying. You had people who were suffering from brain hemorrhages. There were roasting cooks that dropped dead because they couldn't manage to hack the heat. So you really see...
If conditions in this kitchen were bad, Annie has also researched the even earlier kitchens that existed when Victoria arrived in 1837.
This is Buckingham Palace, and we are over here. Quite a big space, but if we look here, this octagonal room, just that tiny space, that's the 1830s kitchens. And all these functions were having to happen in this extraordinarily small space.
The problem of this cramped, poorly ventilated kitchen was made worse by the palace standing on top of the enclosed River Tyburn. Unfortunately, in the 19th century, the Tyburn was a sewer. Attached directly to the palace drains, it left something of a bad smell in these earlier kitchens.
The palace is built on a sewer.
There was a brick floor in the kitchen, which actually turned out to be the top of a sewer that ran underneath the kitchen. So every time it rained, the brick was porous. And there are reports of the kitchen being deep in effluvia. And people are working through that. So it stank, and all of that stench is sweeping upstairs into the main palace. It was unbelievable.
Not consistent with what one thinks of normally as palace life. And in a way, this kitchen then is a sort of metaphor of what London life was like.
You would see everything from the working classes right up to the Queen. So that idea that you've got something really horrendous juxtaposed with something really gorgeous, that's Victorian society in a nutshell.
Victoria.
Albert.
But the horrors below stairs were the last thing on Victoria's mind.
Dash, now stop that!
She famously fell head over heels for her cousin, Prince Albert, whom she married in 1840.
She found him really handsome, with blue eyes and hair very much like her own. She said he had a lovely nose and a cute mouth with fine teeth, so she observed every little detail.
Albert has been compared to our own Prince Philip, Albert's great-great-grandson. Both were dashing outsiders, keen to find a role and keep the monarchy on track. But the first job for any royal consort is to provide an heir and a spare. Albert was keen on his task. Within a year of their passionate marriage, they'd had their first child. In the next 16, they would have 8 more. It created a surprising problem. In a palace of hundreds of rooms, they felt they didn't have enough space. So they devised a plan to build a new wing and get the taxpayer to foot the bill of around £17 million in today's money. At the Royal Archives in Windsor Castle, Assistant Curator Lucy Peter explains what happened.
Got this brilliant letter she wrote to Lord Peel in 1845.
Prime Minister.
We think that this is actually the hands here of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, so they may have been editing this together before the final letter went off. So it says, Sir Robert is acquainted with the state of the palace and the total want of accommodation for our little family, which is fast growing up.
How did this letter eventually go down?
Not particularly well. So the economic climate at this time was pretty bad.
Well, it was appalling, wasn't it? It was famine in Ireland.
So there was this real public anxiety around public spending at just the date when Queen Victoria is writing to him saying we probably need about £150,000. And there are newspaper reports which very jokingly talk about the Queen being like the old lady who lived in the shoe, had so many children she didn't know what to do. So they say that yes, you can have £20,000, but you have to sell Brighton Pavilion, which was George IV's lavish seaside palace down in Brighton.
Buckingham Palace before this building work looked completely different to the way it does today. It had a 3-sided courtyard with an open front and a surprise in the middle.
You can see here, this is Marble Arch.
I had absolutely no idea that Marble Arch had once stood in front of Buckingham Palace.
Actually, what happened is they built the East Front before they moved Marble Arch. So there was this strange year or so where you had Marble Arch sort of within a couple of feet of the front of Buckingham Palace.
The new wing increased the size of the palace by around a quarter. The facade we see today was altered in 1913, but behind it, Victoria's East Wing is still intact. One of the first rooms to be used was the Chinese drawing room, the perfect example of how Victoria transformed the palace into a working family home. Lucy Peter is exploring this unusual room.
This is part of the private areas which people rarely get to see, and it was essentially a private room in which Prince Albert and Queen Victoria would enjoy their breakfast. The interiors in here, they were all brought from Brighton Pavilion, so you get this incredible chinoiserie effect. Queen Victoria records the first time she had breakfast here. She points out the various things that came from Brighton, the overmantels above the doors, how they added a dragon onto the ceiling to make it more in keeping. And the nurseries are just above us, and the servants' quarters are below us. So there's a natural rhythm where the food can come up, and the children on special occasions could be brought down from the nursery. So for Prince Arthur's second birthday, he was brought down into the breakfast room where his parents had laid out a present table. We know that Prince Arthur was given a bearskin hat because Queen Victoria actually writes about it in her journal. I think with lots of the palace interiors that are incredibly lavish, it's so difficult to imagine them being used for family, breakfast rooms, entertaining spaces, but they were spaces that the Queen and her husband and her children would use on a daily basis.
But the East Wing was more than a domestic space. Today, it is one of the most famous stages for monarchy in the world. It's where the royal family appears before the public on great occasions. And that, too, is part of Victoria and Albert's vision. At a time when Parliament was taking much of the monarchy's power, the Crown needed to find a more symbolic role. Victoria and Albert's masterstroke was to realize the East Wing could do just that.
Quite nice to be sitting in a blue drawing room, isn't it, Trevor? Has to be said. Not a bad spot.
Elegant.
I wanted to show you this watercolour because it shows you the new East Wing of Buckingham Palace. And these are the troops returning from the Crimean War. And it's one of the first occasions when that balcony would have been put into use.
It's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, it's
and think how much we see of it today.
But what I love about this is that you can see they're all there on the balcony, but they're almost sort of spilling off it because they're so enthusiastic in welcoming the troops home. And the whole of this stretch of Buckingham Palace that we can see here simply wasn't there. Absolutely the outward face, the statement of the new British monarchy.
And that's always been very important because, I mean, somebody told me about the Queen and the monarchy generally. They're there to be seen.
Victoria's idea has resonated down the generations. But the balcony was just the beginning.
Buckingham Palace has 775 rooms and 78 bathrooms. Around 600 people currently work here.
Buckingham Palace is absolutely huge, with these long corridors, and you very seldom see a member of the staff. I mean, they seem to be sort of invisible.
If anyone knows how to run a stately home, it's Lady Glenconner.
It's like running a sort of mini army. I always said, you know, I could walk into the Ritz tomorrow and run it for them.
Lady Glenconner is the ultimate insider. She was a maid of honour to the Queen at the coronation and lady-in-waiting to Princess Margaret. She grew up in Hokham Hall in Norfolk. Not quite Buckingham Palace, it was still a stupendous operation.
It's rather like the Firth of Forth Bridge. There were 4 ladies who did nothing else except scrub the passages. And they started at one end. By the time they'd finished, they were back again, you know. And they scrubbed on their knees. And I just thought it was perfectly normal.
The kitchen was at the heart of Buckingham Palace, and increasingly, food became the centre of Victoria's life. Hokham has one of the country's finest remaining Victorian kitchens, and it's where I've come to explore Victoria's appetite.
Welcome.
I'm helping Annie Gray make a meal fit for a monarch.
We are going to pluck some quail.
Oh, good.
So what you'll find you need to do is to tighten the skin slightly, and then just don't get too enthusiastic with pulling the feathers out. And what we would do is we'd keep the feathers and they'd be sold off, so nothing gets wasted. And then next we need to gut them. So we'll make a small incision.
Has sound effects as well. Lovely.
Today we're making roast quail stuffed with chicken farce and truffle. It would have been served to Victoria as one of 10 courses. So in the Buckingham Palace kitchen, a single dish like this was just the tiniest appetizer.
But when you start to look at the ledgers, you start to realise quite how much food is being eaten. First 2 weeks of Victoria's reign, they had, I think, 16 butchers who supplied the palace. One of them supplied 4,000 pounds of beef in the first week. So we've got some pâté. You can see there's a truffle that's been soaked in brandy as well. What we're then going to do is use some of this chicken farce that's been mixed with cream, that's been mixed with loads of butter, probably some brandy or some Madeira.
So was this the sort of thing that really tickled her fancy?
It was lots of dishes on the table at once, diners helping each other and helping themselves. So the first course would be soup, it would be fish, sort of things like cutlets and steaks, fancy sauces, or there might be pies or pastries, very elaborately presented. And your second course would come in, roast meats, sweet dishes and vegetable dishes.
When did they go pop? I mean, they're just extraordinary levels of food.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's only 2/3 of the way through as well. There was dessert at the end of that as well.
Right, hold on. Look, this is a total mess now. Shall I just neatly fold them underneath and you look the other way?
Victoria was notorious for being able to put away a 9-course meal in half an hour. It was when she got older that she really ate. She
was petite when she was
7
married.
stone 2 and 5'1", so absolutely tiny. BMI of 18.8, I think. We would look at her now and think, love, eat a burger. And then
later she did.
Well, that's the problem, quite a lot.
Not just one. She wasn't eating light food, was she? I mean, what did it do to her?
Well, she had gout, inevitably, and she really had bad flatulence. And she often tended to convince herself she was having a heart attack when actually it was just that she needed to really let one off.
So I've come along to raise the tone and to help Julie and Annie polish off the Victorian dinner.
Victorian food was absolutely glorious, stupendous. It was a feast for every sense. It had to sort of all work together. You've got the quail that you plucked earlier, with straw potatoes, which are a sort of
I plucked
chip.
it just for you, Trevor.
Thank you.
And then this is a bread croûte in the middle, which is a piece of bread that's been moulded and then glazed with egg. You've got watercress, truffles on top as well. And again, they're just there, just decorating it, because we don't even need to use them, we're so wealthy.
The food must have looked and tasted wonderful. But from my experience, I know that below stairs there was chaos. And the kitchens weren't the only problem.
You had armies of people effectively living off what they could scab from the palaces. If we wanted a fire lit, they'd have said, right, well, somebody has to lay the fire, somebody else has to light the fire. We don't actually have any matches. And the whole thing was just absolutely entrenched.
What was entrenched was corruption.
Yes, I was going to say, people taking the mick.
Did anybody try to tackle this level of corruption?
It wasn't till Albert arrived and really wanted to get his teeth into something and was very frustrated and very masculine and very, I want to do something, that anything started to be done.
Appalled by the state of his home, Albert jumped at the chance to clean it up.
Buckingham Palace is absolutely filthy. There were sort of mice running about. The staff, a lot of them were drunk a lot of the time. And so he had to go in with his sort of German eye and clean it up.
He did it with typical ruthless efficiency. He went through every department and then he slashed the wage bill and he got rid of positions that shouldn't be there.
The staff were absolutely furious. Actually, Prince Albert, knowing what I had to do, had to get rid of an awful lot of people. And that is not popular.
He wanted to try and end this system whereby people were effectively stealing food. And what Albert did was draw up a list of charities that would be entitled to take leftovers to feed the poor. And it worked so well that they fed the poor of Spitalfields with foie gras stuffed quails and just amazing
Lucky
food.
Spitalfields.
Yeah, exactly. He'd kind of proven his mettle by taking on this utterly antiquated, inefficient household and dragging it, kicking and screaming into the 19th century.
Victoria and Albert's mission to modernize the monarchy went way beyond bringing the household to heel. They also understood the value of image. The royal public persona is carefully managed, but this awareness of the power of their image isn't new. I'm joining surveyor of the Queen's Pictures Desmond Shaw-Taylor to uncover its origins.
This is a family portrait of the royal family in 1846. When this was first exhibited, 100,000 visitors came to see it. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were extremely canny about projecting the image of the monarch. The most important thing is that it has the air of something completely informal, and that's an absolutely revolutionary way of representing the royal family, as a model family rather than as the wielders of power.
Victoria and Albert's interest in art went beyond promoting the perfect family. Together, they threw themselves into the task of conserving one of the world's most important private art collections. Victoria herself was a keen artist, and Albert was instrumental in helping to redesign the palace and its interior. One of his legacies was to introduce a system for displaying the hundreds of paintings from the collection in the picture gallery, including Rembrandt's, Rubens, Van Dyck's, and Canaletto's. One incident above all illustrates how Victoria and Albert cared passionately for the art and the palace.
And there's a fascinating account in August 1846 of a freak hailstorm here, which the hailstones were so large that they shattered the glass of the skylights, and their rain was flooding in. And Queen Victoria describes coming here with Prince Albert, and the whole of the palace are here, the pages, the footmen, all protecting paintings, trying to clear the water out of the way. You get this sense of her really caring for, looking after the collection.
I'm still astonished about how she immersed herself in the arts. Before, I thought the artist was Albert, and that he was the profound influence on her and on the monarchy in that regard. But she was really very, very involved in it and made enormous decisions which shaped this place.
This shared passion for reinventing the palace climaxed 6 years after the completion of the East Wing. It combined the royal couple's desire for a venue for the most regal entertainments and state events. It would be Victoria and Albert's high watermark.
Here we are in the ballroom.
Gosh,
which is enormous. It's the largest private room in all of London. The ceilings are 45 feet high. This whole room is 123 feet long. Most houses can fit inside this one room, and no expense was spared. The walls had this incredible colour, reds and greens and blues.
And that was very much Prince Albert's vision, this sort of riot of colour.
Yes, this room is actually a great testament to his taste and knowledge of art. And the ballroom had its very first opening with this particular ball in May 1856. And it's a celebration of the end of the Crimean War. And you can see right here, back at the picture in the middle, that is Queen Victoria. The last thing that they built together and designed together is this ballroom.
This is the palace brought back to life.
Nothing visible remains of the original decor, but we are bringing it back to life. Just the scale of that room gives you a sense of the aspiration that Victoria and Albert had for this reign. It was really turning Buckingham Palace into this epicentre of culture and vision, all brought together under one roof. The ballroom marks a highlight of the early part of Victoria's reign, but soon her world would fall apart. "20 years into her reign, Queen Victoria had revitalised Buckingham Palace and made it a place fit for a family and the new monarchy. She'd built a new East Wing, rebuilt the kitchens and added a ballroom. She'd sown the seeds of the public-facing monarchy that we see today. By 1861, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and London was the fastest-growing city on the planet. But for Victoria, It was the year her life ground to a halt. I've come to Windsor to explore Victoria's horrible year. Just a mile from the castle is Frogmore House. It's where Victoria's controlling mother, the Duchess of Kent, had been exiled from Buckingham Palace 20 years earlier.
You may leave us.
And it is in this royal retreat that Victoria's life began to unravel.
So here we are, coming to the absolute heart of Frogmore.
Couldn't be a more feminine space, really, could it?
Both time and distance had softened the relationship between Victoria and her mother. But this arm's-length embrace was eventually broken by the death of the Duchess of Kent in 1861. Only when it was too late did Victoria discover that her mistrust of her mother might have been misplaced.
Ah, yes, well.
Amanda is showing me a remarkable entry from Queen Victoria's own diary.
Sorting letters again after dinner and found a most touching little notebook in which Mamma had put down every tooth I got when I walked alone, and such tender care and love and affection for me. And look, there's an exclamation mark, for me.
So this was a point at which she was rocked on her foundations?
Oh, completely. I think I knocked her off her foundations. Her mother was misguided, but she wasn't bad. But I can't help wondering whether or not the Duchess of Kent was telling her from the grave, look how much you hurt me.
There's no comeback.
No.
Incredibly hard.
Yes, this would destabilise anybody.
Bereavement was only the start of Victoria's nightmare year. She was then hit by scandal. Her eldest son, the future Edward VII, was then a 19-year-old guardsman. The product of the perfect family, Edward did the unthinkable. He had an affair with a dancer that scandalised society. Albert, who was already in poor health, never recovered from the ordeal. He died in December 1861, aged just 42.
The glue was Prince Albert, and when he died, that glue dissolved in her own personality, and she fell apart.
And it's hard to overstate the grief.
She had become utterly dependent on Prince Albert, and he didn't actually encourage her to be his intellectual partner. Fundamentally, she was left without self-confidence.
And in the context of Buckingham Palace itself, what impact did this have?
It was a disaster for the nation.
She leaves Buckingham Palace. She wants to be isolated. She doesn't want to interact.
The home that Victoria and Albert had so carefully created for the monarchy now stood empty. Queen Victoria spent the next 10 years in virtual exile. Much of it was spent at Balmoral in Scotland, where she struck up a close friendship with servant John Brown. There were even rumours of an affair. The public began to wonder if Victoria would ever return.
The people are getting annoyed. They're getting angry. Where is our queen? They want her back.
Lucy Peter is showing me an extraordinary letter that illustrates how bad things became.
It's an extract taken from a letter which was written and signed by Queen Victoria's children in 1871. It gives you a real sense of the public feeling against the Queen.
No one has prompted us to write. No one knows except we ourselves. It is we, your children, who now feel how utterly changed things are, and who would humbly entreat you to inquire into the state of public feeling, which appears to us so very alarming. They are in a state of real anguish.
And the Queen has just refused to open Parliament. So we're at this sort of real crunch point where there's no longer sympathy for the Queen who's grieving, but there's real public feeling of anger against a Queen who is not being seen or in London.
The letter was never sent. but it demonstrates how concerned the family and the nation were. In 1864, a sign appeared on the palace railings announcing these commanding premises to be let or sold in consequence of the late occupants' declining business. On the rare occasions Victoria did appear in public, her carriage was booed. Something needed to be done, and it took one man to do it.
The White Drawing Room is one of the places where monarchs have met their prime ministers. Victoria had 9 prime ministers. Her first, Lord Melbourne, was a mentor and confidant, and according to Victoria, was like a father to her.
Dear Lord M, don't you think I've arranged things marvellously?
You have been most resourceful, ma'am.
But none was closer to her than Benjamin Disraeli, who became Prime Minister for the second time in 1874.
One of the things that Queen Victoria had lost was her self-confidence. And Disraeli was able to give her a sense of self, a sense of purpose, and then direct that purpose into concrete things.
Disraeli calls her the fairy queen, flatters her, and reminds her, very subtly, but in a very flattering way, about her responsibilities. And then he makes her Empress of India, so he gives her this jewel in the crown, and she loves it.
Coaxed back into public life, Victoria returned to London and to Buckingham Palace.
So after all of the dust sheets had been taken off, this place sprang back into life.
Yes, nothing had been touched since Prince Albert died in 1861.
The reinvigorated Victoria went even further. She began by attending the annual state openings of Parliament once more. She reached out to the public and, in an innovation that continues to this day, opened up Buckingham Palace for garden parties. Originally known as breakfasts, these occasions allow thousands of guests into the 40 acres of private grounds behind the famous facade. Everything we now think of as the modern Buckingham Palace came from Victoria. This new relationship between the Queen and the nation peaked with the celebrations of her reign in 1887 and 1897.
So the first is the Golden Jubilee celebration. This is the London House. This is where the procession is going to go from.
It was the mass celebration, a forerunner of the royal festivities that are enjoyed today. But Victoria's resurgence didn't stop there. Trevor's discovered how she embraced the brave new world that foreshadowed the 20th century.
And that, I'm told, is the cleaned-up version. What still astonishes me is that she was prepared to engage with a frighteningly changing world.
By the time of her Diamond Jubilee in 1897, Victoria had taken the monarchy to new heights of popularity. This remarkable early footage captures the extent of the celebrations and the enthusiasm of the crowds. Hundreds of thousands of people poured into the capital and were given a free meal and cups of tea. Victoria wrote in her journal, "No one has ever met with such an ovation as was given to me." By this time, Victoria was then the longest reigning monarch in British history. Symbolically, the procession began and ended at the rejuvenated palace. Victoria had come home once again.
Đừng bao giờ dạy con rằng là đi ra ngoài nhướng mắt vào đánh chết rất ngu.
This building charts her experience of being a queen and then a widow, because when she goes into mourning, this place sort of goes into the deep freeze, really.
And so it could have ended. In fact, she emerged from that period and again became deeply involved in the affairs of the nation. But for me also, her belief in what would now be called continuity. This was the project which was going to last, and she was going to put her stamp on it.
We won't look at this palace in the same way again, really.
No.
With the new East Wing, the ballroom and the kitchens, Victoria modernized and transformed Buckingham Palace, creating a new kind of royal residence for her own family and for future generations. But more than that, she created an iconic building that is known around the world as the home of the British Monarchy.